All right, we're continuing to talk about biological evolution. And I spend a lot of time talking about Charles Darwin, and I talk about other scientists of the past. And again, it's not because I particularly want you to revere these people as great heroes. They were human beings and they had flaws and their knowledge was incomplete and all that. I'm not talking about Darwin because I think he's an awesome guy. I mean, I think he kind of was, but that's not why I'm bringing him up. What I'm doing with talking about dead people of the past is that I'm trying to reinforce the idea that science is something that humans do. It's something people do. The idea that life on Earth changes over time was not just handed down on Mount Sinai, nor was it whispered into anybody's ear by the devil, as far as anybody knows. It was worked out by people. And I'm trying to give you as much as I can of a sense of how this conclusion was arrived at. Where did people, where did the idea come from? What inspired people to think that this might be possible? That's why I've gone into all of this background detail. And what the man fundamentally did was two things. And one is to fight for your right by the Beastie Boys. Okay, never mind, that's on the chat. He gathered more evidence that life had a history than anybody had done before. I often compare evolution to studying human history in the sense that you can't go back and directly observe it. Nobody's invented a working time machine yet, so I can't go back and watch the Civil War, let's say, or any historical event, right? We will never see exactly that ever again. What I can do is visit battlefields, maybe with permission, dig some up and look for artifacts. I can read, surviving letters and military documents and old newspapers. I could look for photographs. Photography was a thing in 1861. And I could build up as complete a picture as possible of what happened between 1861 and 1865. It's much the same with evolution. We can never go back and watch it. Nobody's ever going to see a Tyrannosaurus Rex taking on a Triceratops. Hate to disappoint. We're probably not even going to clone them. Jurassic Park was a really interesting book, but technically it's not going to work. And I say that as somebody who used to work with the guy whose research inspired it. What we can do is piece together fossil evidence, studies of living organisms, their anatomy, sometimes even their behavior. We can look at the way they develop from egg to adult. We can look at, I won't be able to really explain this until I've gone through it, but we can compare their DNA. We can look at a whole lot of things and work out as complete a picture as possible that life has a history, that evolution has taken place, that life has changed over time. That 65 million years ago, we did not have dogs and cats. Heck, we didn't have grasses. We had ferns and duck-billed dinosaurs and tyrannosaurs. So Darwin puts together more evidence than anybody's ever done before that evolution has happened. And of course, lots of people have added a ton more. He's not the last, there never is a last word in science. The other thing is that he proposed a mechanism for what could cause that change, how evolution could happen. And it's one that we can see going on today. I talked a lot about pigeons on Tuesday, and that's because Darwin himself used pigeons to look at the phenomenon of artificial selection. living things vary within a population. All humans in this class are different. And I mean, if you wanted to take the time, every clover plant on the lawn outside Lewis Science Center is different from all of the others. If you spend enough time looking at it, you would find differences. Individuals in a population vary. In artificial selection, people pick out the individuals that vary in ways that they like. The fastest racehorses, the most productive milk cows, the prettiest goldfish, the cats with the curliest ears, the least yucky tasting cabbages, whatever it might be. They encourage those individuals to breed and discourage the individuals that don't have those properties, those traits. They're discouraged from breeding. And by the way, this was not Darwin's discovery. Farmers had been using it for thousands of years. In fact, I've got a book on a native tribe of the Western US called the Mandan. They used to farm in the valley of the Missouri River. And there's a book on their farming methods and what they did. And the lady who was interviewed, who remembered the old ways of farming, said, of course we know that when we're planting our beans, we have to pick out the biggest for planting and the ones with the best color. Did white people teach us this? No, we know about it from very ancient times. People have known how to do artificial selection as long as they've had agriculture. In answer to the question of the possibility of scientists cloning a woolly mammoth embryo, cool idea. Can I talk about that a little bit later? Yeah, it would be neat, but let me get to that later on in the course when I can talk about what cloning really involves. Okay, natural selection, individuals vary. Some individuals vary in ways that give them better odds of reproducing in the environment where they live. In this case, there is no person saying, okay, this one gets to breed, this one doesn't. It's essentially the world saying this individual gets to breed, this doesn't. Some individuals will vary in ways that give them a better shot of reproducing and passing on their traits to the next generation. Other individuals vary in ways that give them worse odds, and those individuals leave more offspring like themselves. I gave you a number of examples of how we can observe this happening now in the rise of things like herbicide-resistant weeds and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. But I want to give you one more because it's my favorite. You may not remember this. You probably don't. This was 1986. There was a nuclear reactor in the Ukraine called Chernobyl that suffered a huge meltdown. The city nearby had to be evacuated. The Soviet Union tried to keep it hushed up, but radioactivity drifted all over Europe. And the reactor was completely destroyed. It was too radioactive for anybody to survive in for long. And they just built a great big concrete dome over the reactor. Somebody went back in 1997 and found there were fungi growing inside the reactor. And this is what they look like. This is a picture under a microscope. You can see several hyphae. Remember those filaments that fungi grow in. You can also see some spores. They're pretty close, very close to common modern species, but these fungi produce a black pigment. You can see how the hyphae look, it's not really black, but it's a dark gray. And here's the weird thing, that pigment absorbs the most damaging type of radiation, gamma rays. So these fungi have what amounts to, it's almost like sunscreen, except it doesn't block UV, doesn't block ultraviolet light because there isn't any light in that dome. It blocks gamma radiation from the destroyed reactor. And what's weird is that that pigment seems to be able to harness gamma radiation as an energy source. The fungi grow faster with radiation than without it. And if you put a gamma ray source in the dish where you're growing these fungi, they'll grow toward it the way plants grow towards light. We have basically created the Incredible Hulk of fungi here. And it's not artificial selection because people were not deliberately trying to do this. What happened was that when the reactor was sealed, there would have been fungi trapped inside. These are related to fungi that are very common in soils. So there were probably fungus spores in the air and in the dirt people tracked in and just everywhere. Those spores started growing, and maybe most of them would have been killed by the radiation from that power plant. Maybe almost all of them were killed by radiation, but maybe just one of them, for all I know, might have had the ability to produce maybe just a tiny bit of this pigment, but just enough that it could survive and it could grow. And in every fungal generation, maybe most of those fungi died, but the ones that just so happened to be just a bit better at resisting that radiation were the ones that grew and made more spores and passed on their traits to the next generation. And yeah, in answer to a question that was asked in chat, yeah, this was back in the early 90s, but I did do some work with George Poinar, and we published some papers together. That's ancient history, though. Maybe I'll talk about that later, but let's keep on going. So yeah, after 11 years, you've gone from ordinary soil fungus to fungus that not only resists gamma radiation, it freaking eats it. I could not make this stuff up if I wanted to. Darwin actually came up with a third type of selection, and it's called sexual selection. In sexual selection, individuals vary, and those individuals that have traits that the opposite sex prefers have a better chance of reproducing. Often it is males that have traits that females like have a better chance of reproducing, but there's lots of cases where the genders get flipped. There's plenty of cases where females have traits that males prefer. In many species, it actually works both ways. And the traits that one sex prefers could be sound signals. There's a songbird singing, and if you could decode what bird song really means, it would sound like being in the worst meat market frat party that you have ever been in. Bird song, if you could translate it into English, sounds like, hey baby, hey baby, hey baby, hey, can I get your number? Hey, give me your number. Hey, give me your number. Hey, back off, buddy, she's mine. Hey baby, come drink this. Hey, want a drink? That's what bird song sounds like. Typically male birds signaling and females picking out males on the basis of song. And yeah, Ian, you're quite right. This is actually reversed. In one great example is seahorses, where it's the males that get pregnant, have the babies. There's a number of birds that also reverse it. This is about a lecture's worth of material in one of my upper division classes, so I'm going to kind of skim over that, but you're quite right about seahorses. Sometimes it's visual signals. This is a bird you can see right about now on telephone wires in Arkansas. We've got them in my neighborhood. The scissor-tailed flycatcher, where the males will perch on wires and try to attract females by jumping off the wires and swooping and diving and swooping up and swooping down and showing off those awesome tails at every opportunity. And I guess the females just watch this and say, I like big tail feathers and I cannot lie. You other sister can't deny. When a bird flocks in with an itty bitty waist and long feathers in your face, you get, well, never mind. Yeah, there's a reason why I did not become a world famous rapper. In some cases, it might be a visual signal. This is a very small spider from Australia, where the males have these iridescent, flaming red-blue abdomens, and try to attract the females by doing this dance where they stick their legs out and shake their abdomens. I mean, like they really do, they'll vibrate them. And females choose the males that have the shiniest and shakiest abdomens. You might be wondering, what is it about shiny abdomens or long tail feathers or brilliant song that makes those attractive in the first place? That's about a lecture and a half's worth of material in my upper division evolution course, so I can't give you the whole story. In many cases, these traits are indicators of quality. A mate that has bright colors or long tail feathers or bright song or the ability to fly in great big loop-the-loops and swoops and things like that. Sure, Nate, I'll let you back in. Or, you know, huge tail feathers like the peacock. Mates that have those traits will have offspring that are strong, offspring that are likely to survive. And this is some actual data. This was work done on a fish that we don't have in Arkansas, but you could find it farther north in up the Atlantic coast in places like Massachusetts, Maine. They're also on the Pacific coast, Washington State, British Columbia, that part of the world. It's called the three-spine stickleback. And you're looking at a female in between two males, and you'll notice that the males have red on their face, and that red actually extends onto their belly as well. And when a male stickleback feels like getting it on, shall we say, he builds a nest on the bottom of usually a stream. And then starts swimming with his head down and his tail up, shaking his moneymaker. They call it the headstanding dance, showing off that red belly and trying to attract a female that way. And if the female sees his shaking red belly and likes what she sees, she'll swim down to his nest and they will, well, reproduce. What's so great about having a big red belly? Why is that the way that you get the babes if you are a male three-spine stickleback? It turns out that when you look at the offspring, males that have more red also happen to be more resistant to parasites. They're healthier. They've got stronger immune systems. And this seems to be a rule in a lot of species of animals anyway, that the brighter red you are, the better your immune system is. And your offspring will also have stronger immune systems. Now, the female sticklebacks are not thinking this through. They're fish, you know, they're beautiful fish, but they're not brilliant. You know, their brains are, you know, maybe, I don't know, about a quarter the size of a US dime. They're not thinking about this, but females that prefer to mate with red males will have offspring that are healthy and strong and resistant to parasites. Females that prefer to mate with dull males will have offspring that get more parasites and are less healthy and probably die sooner. So after many generations of that, the females that like bright red bellies have more babies than females that don't. And the females that like bright red bellies pass on that preference to their offspring. Now, that kind of explanation does not apply in all cases of sexual selection. That's actually a fairly interesting and complicated field, but hopefully I've given you a bit of a taste of how this works. Okay, right. Okay, and you might be asking yourself, how do we actually get new species going on? Okay, we can get new varieties of bacteria that resist penicillin, or new varieties of soil fungus that eat gamma rays, or new varieties of pigweed that resist all the pesticides that the farmer's spraying on his soybeans or what have you. But how do we get species that are new? I mentioned this earlier. Remember that the definition that we use in biology of what a species is a set of populations whose members can all reproduce with each other and that can't reproduce with other species. The way you get new species is called speciation, and there's several ways this can happen. And again, this is about a week's worth of material in my upper division class. But one of the ways is called allopatric speciation. Again, you will never have to memorize Greek and Latin roots, but patric is related to the word patria, which means your homeland. Like if you love your patria, you are patriotic. And allo means different or separate. So speciation with separated homelands is what allopatric speciation means. You start with a population, a group of individuals that can all potentially interbreed, and then that population gets split. There's two basic ways that can happen. One is that some members of that population can migrate and form a new population, can migrate to a new habitat from which they can't easily migrate back. The other possibility is the old population gets split by a barrier appearing. And I'll show you a terrific example of this in the later part of this lecture. Okay, so now we started with one population and we have two. If the two populations are living in different environments, then each one is going to change by natural selection. We've already talked about that. There's other factors that we don't have time for that can make those populations increasingly different from each other. If you want to look this up for yourself, you can look up things like genetic drift. So the separated populations get increasingly different from each other because they're blocked from reproducing with each other, and each one is being changed by natural selection. And if the populations get to be so different that they're no longer able to interbreed, what we now have is new species. Okay, how does this work? I mean, it's great that we're talking about all this theoretical stuff, but how does this actually operate? Half a tick. Sorry, there's just a red mark on these slides that I'm trying to get out. How's this work? Well, I used to spend a lot of time hiking around in the Mojave Desert of Southern California and Southern Nevada. Beautiful country, but there's not an awful lot of water. I took this picture standing on a small range called the Alexander Hills, looking across a valley to a larger range called the Nopah range. This is not close to anything you would have heard of. It's really out in the middle of nowhere. And this is what that desert area looks like. The closest thing you would have heard of is that this is maybe an hour and a half drive away from Las Vegas. Not far enough for my money. But yeah, this is what it looks like. And there is very little water, which is why they call it a desert. However, if you poke around a lot, as I have, and look at some of the places that I've looked at and that geologists have looked at for over 100 years, you can find things like dry lakes, the beds of lakes that used to hold water but have now completely dried up, and now all you've got is just, sand and silt. Okay, just checking the chat there. Sorry, trying to make the chat go away. Okay, somehow I set my mouse to invisible. There's a window that has popped up that's in the way. Okay. By mapping these ancient lakes that are now just very flat places covered in silt and dust, we can find river channels. Over on the left, that's a view in a place in California called the Owens Valley, where a river has cut a channel through some hills, except now there's not a river there anymore. We can find things like, I'll show you one in a minute. We've got ancient beaches that no longer have any water. Over on the left, that is that's what a very small dry waterfall looks like, carved out of a layer of marble by a stream that does not flow anymore, but that still managed to polish this marble. It's really cool hiking up Mosaic Canyon. And by putting all of this together and mapping where the lake beds and the stream channels and the old beaches are, we know that that desert used to be cooler and it used to be wetter. And it wasn't that long ago. It started drying up at roughly the time that Native Americans started appearing. So it was well within, the time frame of our own species. In fact, on the edges of some of these ancient lakes, we can find ancient fish ponds that haven't had any water in them for a few thousand years. So there were human beings at the time that this desert was a lot cooler and wetter. If you drive up the Beatty Cutoff Road out of Death Valley National Park, and you stop at the right place, you'll see this. The road got cut through a ridge made out of rounded pebbles. Now, rounded pebbles get rounded by the action of water. You could see that if you looked at, go up to the Buffalo River or, any number of creeks and streams in the Ozarks or wherever you're from. And wherever you get water flowing over rocks, what it will tend to do is tumble the rocks around and knock the sharp edges off them and eventually smooth them out. So we have this ridge made out of smooth pebbles. This is an ancient pebble beach. This is the kind of thing you would see if you could go to a lake with a pebbly shore and drive a backhoe through it and cut a trench in the beach. That's what you'd see. The problem is that it is on the rim of Death Valley, which has not had significant amounts of water in it for thousands of years. But it used to. It left these beach deposits behind like a dirty kid might leave a ring around the bathtub. Move forward. I command you. Okay, guys, hang on. Okay, folks, somebody unmute for a second. I assume you're still there. My screen seems to have frozen.
It's frozen
Okay.
on my end, at least. I don't know about everyone else.
All
Yeah,
right.
mine too.
Okay, half a minute. I'm gonna.
My screen's black.
Okay, I have just. All right, okay, I've paused the share. And I'm gonna pause record.